you so much for being here today, Stephen. We're so excited that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
My name is Steven Mayoff. I'm a Canadian writer. I live on Prince Edward Island, which is Canada's smallest province on the east coast of Canada. I was born and raised in Montreal, and I lived in Toronto for a few years. I moved here in 2001, and it's here where I started to. I've written all my life, but it's here where I started publishing books.
Amazing. I would love if you could tell us more about what your books are about.
Sure. Well, I have different kinds of books. I write short stories, I write novels, I write poetry. I'm also a lyricist. And Well, I'll just talk about my books. My first book was called Fatted Calf Blues. It was a short story collection. And these were stories essentially, it's fiction. What I write is, I guess, what's called literary fiction, which is what they call stuff that isn't can't be put into any genre. So these are just stories about everyday people. And then I wrote my second book. My second book was a novel called Our Lady of Steerage, and it's based on family history. It was a story told to me by my uncle about how his parents, my grandparents, traveled from Romania to Cherbourg, France, and then to Canada. And I ended up taking a lot of stuff that was told to me and just turned it into a fictional novel. It's basically immigrants in Montreal, and it covers a span of 40 years. And then I wrote two books of poetry. My first book was a chapbook, a short book of 10 poems. They're ekphrastic poems, which means they're based on paintings by my uncle, the same uncle who told me that story. He was an artist and a teacher in Glasgow, Scotland. And I took 10 of his paintings and sort of wrote poems based on them, but that also dealt with my relationship to him as my family relationship, but also because he was a professional artist and sort of how he influenced me. And then the final fourth book was also a poetry book, more of a full-length book called Swinging Between Water and Stone. And there was a theme to that book. The book was basically in four parts, and I was using the theme of birth, birth, life, a death, and then rebirth. And so each section was sort of based on those things. And now I have a new book coming out. It's a novel, and it's called the Island Gospel of the Island Gospel according to Samson Grief, and it takes place here on Prince Edward Island. It's about a painter. He's a reclusive painter who is seeing figments of his imagination who come in the guise of Judas Iscariot, Shylock from the Merchant of Venice, and Fagin from Oliver Twist. And they claim to be messengers of a deity called the Supreme One. The Supreme One has decided that he wants to turn Prince Edward Island into the new promised land. But first, Samson Grief has to build the first synagogue on Prince Edward Island. And I can talk more about that if you like.
Sure. If there's more you'd like to say about that book, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. So the book is based on the fact that on Prince Edward Island we have lots of churches. It's a very small place, and we have lots of churches, all the denominations. We have a mosque. I think we have two mosques. We have Buddhist temples, but we don't have a synagogue, and we do have a small but significant Jewish population. I myself am from a Jewish background. And so, although I'm not what you would call religious or observant, when I got here and I found out that there was no synagogue, I was kind of fascinated by that. And I'm not entirely sure why, but it kind of stuck with me. And so that's kind of how the novel came about. I decided, what if someone wanted to build one, and what kind of problems they might go through, and it ended up becoming a, I guess, what you would call, well, the way I describe it is, uh, it's satirical magic realism. That's how I think of it.
Love it. I would love if you could tell us what inspired you to write your books.
Well, I'm inspired mostly by just everyday life and day-to-day living. The interesting thing about the short story collection, when I first wrote it, is that, I mean, I've been writing all my life. I've been writing since the end of high school, and I never thought of myself being a writer, but I always kept writing, and I basically kind of drifted through life. I did a lot of different jobs and tried different things, thought I might be different things. I studied acting for a while, and but I kept going back to writing. Writing was my sort of fallback. Um, and then when I finally came to Prince Edward Island, and I started to focus on really seriously on writing, and getting my work published. Um, what I found was, when I was looked at that book and looked at the stories, they were all based on things I had done, um, places I'd been, jobs I'd had, people I met, and I realized that sort of all these years of drifting, or what felt like drifting to me aimlessly, which really wasn't. It was me gathering up all this information about writing. And I think, no one's ever asked me, but I think if someone ever asked me, what does a writer need to do? And I would say, you need to get out there, just live your life, just do all those things, and do the jobs you love and the jobs you hate, and fall in love and travel, and really that's what writing's all about, is that's where you find all the stories, is being out there. And as I was mentioning, the first novel was based on family history. The gestation, for these books, it takes a long time. It usually takes years. In terms of the Island Gospel, according to Samson Grief, I lived cities all my life. I grew up in Montreal, it's a big city, lived in Toronto for 17 years. And I came here because my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, is from here. And we wanted to live in a small place, have a slower way of living. And where we live, I live on 22 acres of wooded land with a river right behind me, and it's very secluded. And there was this illusion, at least I had this illusion, having come from big cities, that it's like the world can't find me. This is such a great place. I feel hidden. And it was great. And it's certainly a great place to be a writer, to write. But what I will say is that we moved here in 2001. Our anniversary happens to be on September 11th. So on September 11th, 2001, we were not celebrating our anniversary. We were watching television and listening to the radio, and realizing that the world has just changed. And I had this amazing, sort of feeling. I said, "Well, no, you're not as hidden as you think you are. The world is going to find you wherever you are." And that kind of did get me start to thinking about this book. But as I say, it took a long time. It took many years.
Amazing. When writing your books, who are you thinking of when it comes to who your books are for?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I do have an audience in mind, but I don't have a specific audience in mind. And I guess my feeling is that it's not for me to go out and find an audience. I really want the audience to find me. When I'm writing the books, I'm the audience. I'm writing the books to please myself. And I mean, I think of writing, in fact, as a kind of performance art, where I'm the performer and I'm also the audience. And as long as I'm entertaining myself in some way, and saying, this is what I want to see on the page, I try to write what I want to read. and and I can only hope is if I can put it out there, you know, what do they say? If you build it, they will come. That's exactly what how I feel about it.
Love it. I know you touched on this, but how long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
Well, I've been writing since the end of high school. I've always been fascinated with words in a way. When I was a kid, we had bookshelves, and I would just stare at the book spines and look at the titles and look at the authors and just kind of, it was, I would say it was almost like a mystical experience. That's how I see it in retrospect. I was also loved music, and we had a lot of records. We had opera and Broadway shows, and my brother had all these 45s, and I used to listen to them. I used to lip sync along with them. I used to have this, I used to think that the singers were making up the words, as they were going along. So that's how I started sort of being interested in words. At the last year of high school, I had a friend who wrote poetry, and I was fascinated. I didn't understand how he could do it. And then I just started doing it myself. I don't even know how I started. I just started trying it. And I remember the head of our English department was very, really encouraged me. And she used to say, you're going to be a poet. And I said, "Mm, I don't know how I'll make a living that way, but okay." And, but writing was always a fallback. It was something I needed to do just to vent my, everything I was feeling, things I couldn't express any other way. But I never had this idea that I could be a writer. And so, as I say, I drifted along a lot. And it wasn't until I moved here to Prince Edward Island, it was 2001. I was 45. I mean, I'm like the textbook definition of late bloomer. So, and I had been writing, and I said, I'm just going to try this and, really start. And I did. And it took a while, it took a long time, but slowly I started to get stuff published in magazines. It did take a while. And then in 2009, my first book came out. Second one came out in 2015, and the poetry books came out in 2018 and 2019. And now here, 2023, my fifth book is coming out. So
Amazing. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
I have a very loosey goosey schedule. I did 9 to 5 jobs or jobs that had a very set schedule all my life. And when I came here and when I decided I'm going to write, and I pretty much had all the time in the world to write, and I thought, I'm not going to make it a 9 to 5 job. I don't want it to be a 9 to 5 job. I want it to be something more organic, something much more integrated into everyday life. And so I mean, for a long time, having all this time to write, I did often go, I'm not writing enough. I have all day. Why am I not doing it as much as I need to be doing? And there was a lot of times, just frustration and guilt and going, I need to work harder. I need to work harder. And then what was interesting was that even saying that and writing at a very leisurely pace, I was writing stories. Stories were emerging. Poetry was emerging. And it was, I went, oh, I'm producing stuff, even though I'm not, killing myself to do it. I'm doing it at this leisurely pace. And so I've kept that, and I wake up, I have a very long waking up period to sort of, get up. I go for a run. I, come back. I have coffee with my wife, and and I like to look. I read a lot of what I do, and I have I have to say I have what I call the 4 Ps, which is producing. Um, oh dear, sorry, I'm going to go and blank. I'm blanking on that. I'm not going to go on about that. But I do think that the time away that you spend from writing part of you is still writing. Part of your brain is working out problems, story problems. And I'll say one of the best things I do, when I'm sort of not sure how to keep going, is to go for a walk. Go for a walk, put on my iPod, and just not think about things. And I come back and I suddenly have an idea, of how to keep going.
Love that. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
What I really need is as much quiet as possible and as much solitude as possible. Because I'm always amazed that you go into Starbucks or cafes and something, and people are sitting there and they're writing on their laptops or they're writing in their notebooks, and to me, I'm very easily distracted. I'm my worst distraction. It doesn't take much to distract me, and so I just need to have a quiet, comfortable place, and my laptop, and that's it. Nothing else.
Love that. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
No snacks, no drinks. Again, you know what? I would be. Yeah, I love snacking, and to me, it would just be another diversion. I would say, man, I love this popcorn. I better think about this scene. No, I like this popcorn too much. So yeah, nothing like that. I'm not really into that at all.
Love it. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
Well, I mostly read fiction, and I guess I mostly read what is known as literary fiction. Um, I like Don DeLillo. He's one of my favorite writers. Um, I grew up reading Kurt Vonnegut, Alice Munro, who's a Canadian writer. Mordecai Richler, another very famous writer from Montreal, and books that are basically about real life. I'm not really that much into fantasy or things like that. I like writers who write about sort of the amazing possibilities of the small things in life.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Well, again, Mordecai Richler, Philip Roth, Kurt Vonnegut for sure. He's a major influence for me. Slaughterhouse Five is one of my favorite novels. Yeah, I'd say those, and again, I'll name Don DeLillo again. I think he's an amazing writer.
Love that. What type of books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
Well, when you say grow up reading, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really start getting into books until in my 20s. Now, in high school, I read The Apprenticeship of Dirty Kravitz, Mordecai Richler's novel, and I read Catcher in the Rye. So I would say those two, particularly, they stayed with me, and I read a lot of Salinger later on. Loved his short stories. His short stories very, very influential. But yeah, but when I started reading, I was reading Dylan Thomas, reading a lot of poetry, reading a Scottish writer, no, sorry, an Irish writer named J.P. Dunleavy, The Ginger Man. Again, is a novel I read and reread many times.
Love that. On the opposite side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors who, when they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
Repeating myself, but again, Don DeLillo. I When they come like modern writers, oh, Kazuo Ishiguro. Yeah, those two, mainly those two.
Love that. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
So with who are starting to read again? First of all, find your passion, find the stuff you like to read, and that would be a jumping off point. But don't be afraid to veer off into reading things that are challenging. You'd be surprised to find what you enjoy if you sort of go off into something and say, wow, I've never read this kind of book before. Definitely, but always as a fallback, when you read something and it's strange and you go, not my thing, always go back to the thing you love. And a lot of rereading these days, I'm rereading the classics, rereading Dostoevsky, and rereading a lot of Russian authors. So go to the classics.
Love that. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
Be kind to yourself. It's really easy to beat yourself up and go, "Oh, I'm terrible. This is not working." Be kind to yourself, and make sure that you give yourself time. The whole thing about writing a novel is it's very time consuming, and you tend to think, you put yourself on a schedule and you say, "Oh, I got to do this much," and it's very counterproductive. And allow yourself to just and allow yourself to try different things. You've written a scene, and you read it and you go, "Well, what if this happens? And what if that happens?" Really explore, really dig deep into characters, into settings, and really think about, use all your senses: taste, smell, sight, hearing. When you look at a scene, always go back. And this is the way I write. I write a scene, and then I immediately go back and read it, and I start adding detail. People will tell you, no, just write your novel and go back, write the second draft, then go back. And I do not do that. I'm not saying everyone should do that, but it really works for me to write something. And sometimes I might not know what comes next. And I'll just say, okay, go back and start adding detail. Or a book I read about short stories had a great image. They said writing is like candle dipping. And, you dip it once. And so you have, the start, and then you dip it again and it gets a little thicker. And a story or a scene is like that. You go back, you add detail. What do things smell like or sound like? And it is, you're adding richness to it.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
That I'm not as some most well, I'm mostly introverted, but sometimes I can be more social than I let on, or than I want to be. I'm not normally a social person, but every now and then I get to a situation. I used to do a lot of writing workshops, and I found, strangely enough, and this surprised me more than anyone else, how outgoing I was being around other writers. And I think that was the key. I was around other people who were doing the same thing I was doing. And so, I mean, it's only natural you would sort of want to make friends. And I made a lot of friends too.
Love that. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
Well, I talk a bit about my lyric writing, if that's okay. I started writing lyrics actually around the same time I started writing poetry, and I used to collaborate with a friend of friends if they had, if they would play guitar or whatever. And still, it was something I was a bit frustrated. I was going, I'd really like to start doing this more. And I tried to learn music myself. I just don't have that kind of talent. And in the 80s, met a writer or a pianist named Ted, and he was an acting student. I also went to acting school. And we started writing songs. And the moment we met, we just started writing. And we wrote for many, many years. And um, coming February, we wrote a rock opera called Dion, a rock opera, and it's based on the Bacchae, Greek tragedy by Euripides. Its world premiere at the Coal Mine Theatre in Toronto in February next year.
That's so amazing. Where's the best place for readers to find your book? I know some readers love signed copies. Is that an option? And the best place to connect with you?
The best place to connect with me is on Instagram, Steven underscore Mayoff. You could also try X or Twitter at Steven Mayoff, Steven capitalized, Mayoff capitalized. Um, and To find my books, I would guess, you go to anywhere online, Amazon. Um, you can also, like for my newest book, you can try Radiant Press, which is my publisher. They're in Saskatchewan. They'll sell my book. And of course, I guess I always like to promote bookstores. And I guess if you go into any bookstore and ask for my name, Steven Mayoff, they should be able to search it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop those links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed myself.
I was